Alrighty, folks, you probably heard about a month ago, I was featured in a Fortune article talking about people being tied down with their 3% mortgages, talking about folks becoming what is often called accidental landlords. So I thought we should have this conversation with Dana, the CEO of Himlane, talking about accidental landlords, things that people should think about, because you buy a home, you live in it with your family, life goes on. Instead of selling it, you're like, hey, we should rent this out for some cash flow. So Dana, let's talk about accidental landlords.
So the first thing I want to bring up is that we've seen a rise in accidental landlords more recently. And part of that has to do with the calculation of saying, I've been locked into these interest rates, 3%, and whoever buys this property is not going to have those interest rates. The market has obviously been softening. And so you put that calculation in place and say, I have some sort of advantage to rent this because I'm locked into an interest rate that someone else couldn't get for this property. And so we've seen folks upgrade where they're living, or they're just moving for job reasons, something else, personal reasons, and they hold on to the property they have. That is what we consider an accidental landlord. And that, I believe, will continue through the next couple of years here, especially when people are doing the equation on interest rates.
I think you're underselling it. I think accidental landlords increase in numbers or percentages probably for the next decade. What I mean by that is every year there are more accidental landlords, because
Landlords. Yeah.
yeah, I think generally speaking, I think people stay in their home, roughly speaking, 8 years, or at least in their mortgage, 8 years. I think because of this generation, because the Fed broke housing by keeping rates too low for too long. It's just, the math is simple. And I actually told Fortune, and I sort of said it off the cuff, but they included it in the article. I said, people can feel free to sell if they don't like money. And they included that in my quote. Because the math is so simple, right? You have a 2.8% mortgage. It's 60% of what rent would be today. But you don't think rent's going to be higher in 10 years?
Yeah.
The beauty of these and again, the United States is uniquely positioned. 30-year fixed rate debt. I was asked on Twitter the other day, hypothetically, if we had a mortgage more akin to Canada or the UK or New Zealand, where it was fixed for 2 years and then it adjusted, would that lead to a crash? And I'm like, heck yeah. Heck yeah, that could lead to a crash. Because again, it's always the debt. But what we're seeing today, and what we'll see for the next decade at least, is the debt's an asset. A 2.8% mortgage is half of inflation.
Yeah.
It's wild to think about this. So yeah, I think accidental landlords grow, and I think accidental landlords need to come to folks like Himlane, because it's their home. They grew up there. They have all these memories. Do they want to be, in-person property managers? They want to pay somebody. There's just all of these decisions. So I think Himlane probably should market to accidental landlords. Have you thought about it? Because again, I think the math is pretty simple.
Yeah, they definitely come to Hemlane. I think they find us through referrals, other folks they're talking to who have rentals. I would say there's two things. Okay, so there's, when you're an accidental landlord, it goes one of two ways. The first is you're an accidental landlord and you realize after a couple of years of doing it and not having sophisticated processes and kind of trying to almost treat it like a personal relationship or friendship with these people, because now they're living in your emotional home.
Correct.
They get out of it. They realize, hey, this is not for me. The other way that it goes is that you become an accidental landlord and you treat it professionally like an actual business. You try to take away a lot of those emotional ties to the property. And then you kind of get addicted to real estate investing. You're like, hey, this is pretty easy. Done right. This is pretty easy. Let me go purchase another property. And we've seen folks end up in both of those categories. And I actually never know when an accidental landlord comes to us and says, hey, my home I used to live in, I'm going to put it on the market as a rental. And, this is my plan right now based on my financial situation. I never know which way they're going to go. However, one thing I would say is, if you are considering taking a home you've lived in and you're thinking about doing this, there are some things that we as investors, so Michael and I have to be like very direct about. One, you have to try to take away a lot of these emotional ties to the property. And I've seen way too many situations where you're an accidental landlord, used to live in the property, and there's something that's emotional to you, such as it's got granite countertops. And that makes it worth so much more. And I can charge an extra $100 in monthly rent than the identical property down the street. And there's certain things that you loved about living there, and you have to understand tenants don't think the same way. And so that is really important with it. The second is having kind of this judgment and not being objective about who lives in the property. And so I believe, while I like the trend and I encourage the trend of accidental landlords, because it gets folks out there addicted to something like one rental at a time, and it gives them some experience with owning rental properties and having passive cash flow. At the same time, if you are too emotionally attached to this property, and I would also argue that's probably not the best investment for you. It depends, right? Do the math. If you are emotionally attached, this could be the worst investment that you have.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
so I try to be as direct as possible. And I found over time that it's only dealing with these accidental landlords, whether they're going to go one or two directions with that property they used to live in.
It's funny. I actually have a pretty consistent experience on this, and it's funny. It's not about the house. It's often about the yard, right? If
Okay.
you're a homeowner and you've taken time to plant flowers in the front yard, or sometimes it's the backyard, you have these fruit trees or whatever it is.
Yeah.
They were your babies for a decade. Then you move on. You get a renter in there, and you come by in 90 days, and your roses are dead, or the fruit tree's been broken, or whatever. I've seen some accidental landlords absolutely lose it.
Yeah.
These things mean nothing to the tenant. In fact, they probably work and cost money with water and all of that. So, yeah,
Exactly.
there's a very good chance your rose bushes are going to die, and it won't look as good as when you did it. I've actually seen yard work, and it's funny. It's never the house, or not never, rarely the house. It's
House.
always like the
Yep.
plants and the outside that I've seen just some owners just get wonky on.
Exactly. And then they make these decisions where they might not be the best for your investment.
Just out of
But
raw emotion. Yeah.
not just like, okay, now I'm going to have to do the landscaping and keep up those rose plants and this and that, versus saying what uses very little water that can
Exactly.
just be put in place. It looks good enough that the neighbors also like it, they appreciate it, but it's something that the tenants are going to be able to easily maintain. And so those are really important with that. And you having that emotional attachment to it suddenly means you don't treat it as much like a business relationship, a professional relationship, and oftentimes you do disservice to the tenants as you do to yourself. And so I would just encourage you, like, if you are looking to, and you say, I do have a property I'm moving out of, I'm locked into this interest rate. As you said, Michael, it's an asset, not considered debt in that case. I would just encourage you to really set up a really strong process, because I can see how you get involved with one rental at a time. This leads to more. This is basically the impetus of going out and purchasing more rental properties. It's a fantastic experience, but you do need to take a look in the mirror and think about that. And I've told a lot of accidental landlords who cannot get rid of that emotional attachment. I tell them, after you're renting it now, 1031 it. Go find another property that you are not emotionally attached to,
Yeah.
and just get rid of this one. And they think it's so interesting that I'm basically trying to almost lose a customer in that sense of like, get rid of this one, sell it.
Yeah.
But it's actually more for them and for their investment, and also for their own sanity, that
Yeah.
it's much more passive for them. It's much more enjoyable to go out and actually do a systematic one rental at a time process and have a really clear process in place.
Yeah, it is so much about this is just about the numbers and process and procedures and audit trail. Emotion shouldn't be a part of it. In fact, anytime I've let emotion get into mine, I make bad decisions.
Yep.
And you've got to put those away, put them behind you. There's plenty of things in life where emotion's an asset. Being a landlord is not one of
Yeah.
them. So, yeah.
And I've had accidental landlords who've actually really surprised me, where they go in and they make changes to the property to become unemotionally attached to it. Or they've said, I've ripped out, the garbage disposal and things like that. And it's interesting because you actually never have any idea until you talk to the person how much education they've done from channels like this to know, have they actually done their homework and their research and know what they're getting into, or they kind of blindsided because they woke up one day and said, I'm going to get passive income, but I'm still going to be emotionally attached, and not realize the ramifications of that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you do for everyone at One Rental at a Time is you have a 30-day trial at hemlane.com. You also have a PDF in the free course, or if they want to watch videos in the paid course. Folks, if you are thinking about someday you might be an accidental landlord, take the 30-day trial, play with it, advertise the property, do repair requests, collect money, try to remove emotions, audit trail, all of that. So any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say, if you are thinking about keeping the property, go physically write down everything that you're emotionally attached to, like do your homework and say, how am I going to change this? How am I going to objectively manage this property? And then obviously set up the right systems in place where you aren't using pen and paper anymore to manage your property.
Yeah,
Because again,
please.
then that's
Please.
that personal relationship and getting too close versus having a system in place.
There you go. Well, again, folks, go get the 30-day trial, hemlane.com. Tell them you came from One Rental at a Time, and you get a little goodie discount the first year. Thank you so much.